Brad Pitt just broke his own record with his new F1 movie, which soared past $550 million at the global box office, officially becoming the highest-earning sports film in history, and he did it without screaming for attention or needing a scandal to make people care. Just a calm, focused, and a locked-in Brad Pitt, who at 60 years old gave a performance so sharp and magnetic that the entire industry was forced to pause and acknowledge what it had always known. Some people don't need to fight for greatness. They are the definition of it. And while the world gets louder, messier, and more addicted to short-lived buzz, Brad Pitt moves in silence. And in that silence, he's doing what legends do, setting the standard for everyone else, and doing it with such ease, it almost seems unfair. I don't usually like to talk about the very private moments of Hollywood actors, but it's the timing that makes this impossible to ignore, because just a few days ago, while the world was celebrating the box office domination of his latest project, Brad Pitt was privately grieving the most painful loss of his life, the death of his mother, Jane Pitt. A private goodbye to the one person who had loved him long before the world did, and the one who kept loving him long after the world started pulling him apart. And now, as Brad steps onto film sets, headlines trend with his name, and the industry once again crowns him a king. He does it while carrying a kind of grief that most people never see, the grief of a man who just lost his mother and still chose to show up and deliver something extraordinary. It's this balance between unimaginable grief and total creative control that separates Brad Pitt from almost everyone else in Hollywood. While others rely on controversy or chaos to stay in the conversation, he's walking through personal tragedy with quiet dignity, and he's doing what he's always done when the world starts asking too many questions. He works, and that's exactly what he's doing right now. In the midst of this silent mourning, Brad is back on set, this time reuniting with David Fincher, one of the most meticulous and psychologically demanding directors in the industry, and together they're resurrecting one of Brad's most iconic roles, Cliff Booth.
My name's Cliff. I'm Rick Dalton's stunt double.
The stuntman who drove through the golden age of Hollywood like he owned it, who carried himself with the kind of dangerous calm that made everyone else look like they were trying too hard. And now, 6 years after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, reminded us why Brad Pitt doesn't just act in movies but inhabits them.
Not bad, Kato. Try that again.
He's stepping back into those worn leather boots. And I think that this reunion with Fincher is very different from every other Hollywood comeback story, because Brad Pitt has finally become the actor he was always meant to be, and that transformation is exactly why he just proved he's a Hollywood legend. Brad just had the biggest box office success of his career at 60 years old. Most actors his age are either chasing franchise money or settling into comfortable supporting roles. Sure, Tom Cruise is still doing his own stunts and Keanu Reeves continues to fight, but here's what makes Brad Pitt different. He's not relying on spectacle or established franchises to stay relevant. He's doing it with pure craft, taking original stories and making them feel essential. That's not luck. This acknowledges that there are other successful older actors, while still emphasizing what makes Brad Pitt's approach unique. His focus on original, craft-driven performances rather than relying on established franchises or action spectacle. What Brad Pitt is doing in this moment of his life is more than a career achievement. It's a personal statement, delivered without fanfare in the language he understands best: total focus, restraint, and presence. Brad seems to be moving with a sense of clarity that only comes from having already seen the peak, survived the fall, and chosen to rise again with even greater intention. There is a difference between working to stay relevant and working because something deep inside refuses to settle, and that's what you feel when you watch him right now. This isn't the energy of a man trying to protect a legacy. This is the rhythm of someone creating a new chapter, quietly, precisely, and on his own terms. And of course, the world is paying attention when his new F1 movie exploded past $550 million globally, making it the highest-grossing sports movie ever released. Brad led an original, character-driven story to global domination, and he did it on his own terms, with no studio safety net, no algorithmic hype cycle, and no inflated nostalgia to prop him up. Just pure Hollywood performance and presence. And what's truly fascinating is how he manages to do all of this with a kind of emotional control that most actors spend decades trying to fake. In interviews, on red carpets, even in behind-the-scenes footage, Brad carries himself with the stillness of someone who knows exactly who he is and who no longer needs to explain it to anyone. That kind of confidence doesn't come from charm or years of box office success. You can see clearly that it comes from pain, from loss, from living through chapters that almost broke him, and choosing to keep walking anyway. Brad Pitt's public life has been dissected, judged, and thrown back in his face more times than most people could stomach. And through it all, he's never once leaned into victimhood or asked for pity. Instead, he quietly turned inward, surrounded himself with work that challenged him, directors who didn't let him coast, and stories that forced him to access parts of himself that fame had once tried to bury. You see it in his choices. They're the projects of someone who has redefined what visibility even means. He's stepping into stories that are more intimate, more grounded, more demanding of emotional truth than surface-level spectacle. And while other stars rely on formulas and franchises, Brad continues to take risks, the kind that require real vulnerability, real patience, and real trust in the process. And perhaps that's why his presence today feels heavier, more textured, more earned. He's not leaning into charisma, he's not leaning into nostalgia, he's leaning into discipline. The kind of discipline that doesn't photograph well, doesn't trend online, but always shows up on camera in the way he listens, pauses, breathes, and lets a scene unfold around him instead of forcing it. What we're seeing now is a refined version of Brad Pitt, a version shaped not by publicists or perception, but by experience. There's no desperation in his work now, no need to prove he still has it. Because if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that he's stopped chasing moments. And this phase of his life, this creative rebirth that comes in the midst of personal heartbreak, is perhaps the most quietly powerful act of his career. Because while the world celebrates his numbers and headlines shout about the record-breaking success of his latest film, he is somewhere else entirely, on a quiet set, focused, grieving, rebuilding, and putting in the kind of work that has nothing to do with fame and everything to do with purpose. There is a weight to his silence that feels louder than any campaign. And there is something incredibly rare, almost extinct, about a man of his stature who continues to approach his work with humility. Not performative humility, but the real kind. The kind that understands how fragile time is. The kind that knows how quickly it can all disappear. The kind that shows up anyway, fully, because showing up is the only thing left that still feels honest. And maybe that's what this entire moment is about. Not the record, not the comeback, not the headlines, but the reminder that greatness isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with a script. It doesn't need validation. It reveals itself slowly, quietly, and when it does, you feel it. It settles in gradually, like a shadow that follows the light, not trying to steal attention, but impossible to ignore once it's there. It's in the way people stop scrolling when his face appears, in the quiet admiration from fellow actors who know exactly how rare this level of mastery is, and in the audiences who keep showing up, not out of habit, but because they can feel there's something real behind the performance. Greatness like this doesn't flash, it resonates. And Brad Pitt, whether he means to or not, keeps reminding us of what that truly looks like. Brad Pitt doesn't need to prove that he's a legend. He simply shows you why. So when we talk about Hollywood legends, we often focus on their most iconic roles, their most glamorous moments, or the records they break. But maybe that's not where legacy is really written. Maybe it's written in how they carry themselves when no one's watching. Maybe it's in how they return to the work when everything else has fallen apart. Brad Pitt isn't just a legend because he's still here. He's a legend because of how he's still here. Calm, clear, present, and more connected to the craft than ever. And while the industry continues to chase its next headline, he's already moved on. Building something deeper, something lasting, something only time will fully understand. Because the truth is, Brad Pitt doesn't follow Hollywood. Hollywood still follows him.